brought to you by Charity Mobile, the phone company that sends 5% of your monthly plan price to your favorite charity. No contracts, nationwide coverage, risk-free guarantee. Learn more at CharityMobile.com.
You know, for many Catholics, popular culture is sort of a guilty pleasure. And for good reason, too. Most people who object to Hollywood, popular music, popular films, television, whatever it is, they do so from a place of faith. They see the grotesque things Hollywood pushes off screen, or they see how movies and popular music are vehicles for things that fly in the face of the faith, or contrary to the deposit of the faith, to how we are supposed to live as good Christians. They see this, and so they just disconnect. And for others, they see that there can be some value in things like movies as a concept, just movies themselves, or music, or anything else. And many are left in this kind of a quandary. What is it you do as a Christian? Do you consume this stuff at all? Do you keep away from it completely? Do you find where you can watch things without too many compromises being made? I'm curious how you handle it, so let me know in the comments. But this isn't a new problem. You see, for the Christian, this has been a problem since Hollywood filmed its first movie. The popes of the 20th century had a lot to say about movies, especially the pre-war popes. And so I have one of the documents that Pope Pius XI wrote, an open letter to the bishops, especially to the bishops in America, but open letter to the bishops on the need for the creation of a sort of a control board for Hollywood. Not to control Hollywood itself per se, but to at least, the very least, let Catholics know what Catholics should and should not watch. In that, he praises the work of an organization that has long since gone by the wayside, a group that gave up the ghost in 1965, the year of the closing of the greatest council ever, and the group called the Legion of Decency. The Legion of Decency, for those who don't know, were formed in the 1930s as a response to Hollywood just losing the plot, just pushing violence and the sins of the flesh and all sorts of things on screen in ways that, if you see it now, could still be somewhat intense. My wife found a film, a Robin Hood movie, I think it was, made before the Legion of Decency, just before the Legion of Decency started, and was surprised because it had some very Game of Thrones kind of things in it, as much as the technology of the time would have permitted, and as much as the moral standards of the time that they had would have permitted. And I invoke the moral standards because the way she described it to me was not tame, but it was, you get away with a lot more now on late night broadcast TV. You'll see some similar kinds of stuff in modern television shows like Blacklist and things like that. And I was a little surprised, though, still, because we have this image in our head that the 1920s and 1930s, yes, had their moral problems, were this place where the seeds for the modern moral rebellion were sowed, but things were better. Turns out they may not have been that much better. So for you today, I have one of the letters that Pope Pius XI wrote to the U.S. bishops on the need for a proper ordering of what Hollywood is and how Catholics can use their influence to get popular films and music and things that actually more conform to our standards, or at least don't disrupt and try to destroy them. Let me know what you think of this at the end. Vigilanti Cura, encyclical letter of Pope Pius XI on the motion picture. In following the vigilant eye, as our pastoral office requires, the beneficent work of our brethren in the episcopate and of the faithful, it has been highly pleasing to us to learn of the fruits already gathered and of the progress which continues to be made by that prudent initiative launched more than 2 years ago as a holy crusade against the abuses of the motion pictures and entrusted in a special manner to the Legion of Decency. This excellent experiment now offers us a most welcome opportunity of manifesting more fully our thought in regard to a matter which touches intimately the moral and religious life of the entire Christian people. First of all, we express our gratitude to the hierarchy of the United States of America and to the faithful who cooperated with them, for the important results already achieved under their direction and guidance by the Legion of Decency. And our gratitude is all the livelier for the fact that we were deeply anguished to note with each passing day the lamentable progress, magni passus extraviam, of the motion picture art and industry in the portrayal of sin and vice. As often as the occasion has presented itself, we have considered it the duty of our high office to direct to this condition the attention not only of the episcopate and the clergy, but also of all men who are right-minded and solicitous for the public weal. In the encyclical Divini Illis Magistri, we had already deplored that potent instrumentalities of publicity, such as the cinema, which might be of great advantage to learning and to education were they properly directed by healthy principles, often unfortunately serve as an incentive to evil passions and are subordinated to sordid gain. In August 1934, addressing ourselves to a delegation of the International Federation of the Motion Picture Press, we pointed out the very great importance which the motion picture has acquired in our days and its vast influence alike in the promotion of good and in the insinuation of evil. And we called to mind that it is necessary to apply to the cinema the supreme rule which must direct and regulate the great gift of art in order that it may not find itself in continual conflict with Christian morality, or even with simple human morality based upon the natural law. The essential purpose of art, its raison d'etre, is to assist in the perfection of the moral personality, which is man, and for this reason it must itself be moral. And we concluded, amidst the manifest approval of that chosen body, the memory still dear to us by recommending to them the necessity of making the motion picture moral, an influence for good morals, an educator. And even recently, in April of this year, when we had the happiness of receiving in audience a group of delegates to the International Congress of the Motion Picture Press, held at Rome, we again drew attention to the gravity of the problem, and we warmly exhorted all men of goodwill, in the name not only of religion, but also of the true moral and civil welfare of the people, to use every means in their power, such as the press, to make of the cinema a valuable auxiliary of instruction and education rather than of destruction and ruin of souls. The subject, however, is of such paramount importance in itself, and because of the present condition of society, that we deem it necessary to return to it again, not alone for the purpose of making particular recommendations, as on past occasions, but rather with a universal outlook, which, while embracing the needs of your own dioceses, venerable brethren, takes into consideration those of the entire Catholic world. It is in fact urgently necessary to make provision that in this field also the progress of the arts, of the sciences, and of human technique and industry, since they are all true gifts of God, may be ordained to His glory and to the salvation of souls, and may be made to serve in a practical way to promote the extension of the kingdom of God upon earth. Thus, as the Church bids us pray, we may all profit by them, but in such a manner as not to lose the good eternal. Sic transemus per bona temporale ut non admittamus aeterna. Now then, it is a certainty which can be readily verified that the more marvelous the progress of the motion picture art and industry, the more pernicious and deadly has it shown itself to morality and to religion, even to the very decencies of human society. The directors of the industry in the United States recognized this fact themselves when they confessed that the responsibility before the people and the world was their very own. In an agreement entered into by common accord in March 1930 and solemnly sealed, signed, and published in the press, they formally pledged themselves to safeguard for the future the moral welfare of the patrons of the cinema. It is promised in this agreement that no film which lowers the moral standard of the spectators, which casts discredit upon natural or human law, or arouses sympathy for their violation, will be produced. Nevertheless, in spite of this wise and spontaneously taken decision, those responsible showed themselves incapable of carrying it into effect, and it appeared that the producers and the operators were not disposed to stand by the principles to which they had bound themselves. Since, therefore, the above-mentioned undertaking proved to have but slight effect, and since the parade of vice and crime continued on the screen, the road seemed almost closed to those who sought honest diversion in the motion picture. In this crisis, you, venerable brethren, were among the first to study the means of safeguarding the souls entrusted to your care, and you launched the Legion of Decency as a crusade for public morality designed to revitalize the ideals of natural and Christian rectitude. Far from you was the thought of doing damage to the motion picture industry. Rather, indeed, you arm it beforehand against the ruin which menaces every form of recreation, which, in the guise of art, degenerates into corruption. Your leadership called forth the prompt and devoted loyalty of your faithful people, and millions of American Catholics signed the pledge of the Legion of Decency, binding themselves not to attend any motion picture which was offensive to Catholic moral principles or proper standards of living. We are thus able to proclaim joyfully that few problems of these latter times have so closely united bishops and people as the one resolved by cooperation in this effort. Not only Catholics, but also high-minded Protestants, our so-called elder brothers, and many others accepted your lead and joined their efforts with yours in restoring wise standards, both artistic and moral, to the cinema. It is an exceedingly great comfort to us to note the outstanding success of that battle. Because of your vigilance and because of the pressure which has been brought to bear by public opinion, the motion picture has shown an improvement from the moral standpoint. Crime and vice are portrayed less frequently. Sin is no longer so openly approved and acclaimed. False ideals of life are no longer presented in so flagrant a manner to the impressionable minds of youth. Although in certain quarters it was predicted that the artistic values of the motion picture would be seriously impaired by the reform insisted upon by the Legion of Decency, it appears that quite the contrary has happened, and that the Legion of Decency has given no little impetus to the efforts to advance the cinema on the road to noble artistic significance by directing it towards the production of classic masterpieces, as well as of original creations of uncommon worth. Nor have the financial investments of the industry suffered, as was gratuitously foretold, for many of those who stayed away from the motion picture theater because it outraged morality are patronizing it now that they are able to enjoy clean films, which are not offensive to good morals or dangerous to Christian virtue. When you started this battle, it was said that your efforts would be of short duration, and that the effects would be not long-lasting. As the vigilance of bishops and faithful gradually diminished, the producers would be free to return again to their former methods. It is not difficult to understand why certain of these might be desirous of going back to the sinister themes which pander to base desires and which you had prescribed, while the representation of subjects of real artistic value and the portrayal of the vicissitudes of human virtue require intellectual effort, toil, ability, and at times considerable outlay of money. It is often relatively easy to attract a certain type of person and certain classes of people to a theater, which presents picture plays calculated to inflame the passions and arouse the lower instincts latent in the human heart. An unceasing and universal vigilance must, on the contrary, convince the producers that the Legion of Decency has not been started as a sort of fight of short duration, soon to be neglected and forgotten, but that the bishops of the United States are determined, at all times and at all costs, to safeguard the recreation of the people, whatever form that recreation may take. Recreation in its manifold varieties has become a necessity for people who work under the fatiguing conditions of modern industry, but it must be worthy of the rational nature of man, and therefore must be morally healthy. It must be elevated to the rank of a positive factor for good, and must seek to arouse noble sentiments. A people who, in time of repose, give themselves to diversions which violate decency, honor, or morality, to recreations which, especially to the young, constitute occasions of sin, are in grave danger of losing their greatness and even their national power. It admits of no discussion that the motion picture has achieved these last years a position of universal importance among modern means of diversion. There is no need to point out the fact that millions of people go to the motion pictures every day, that motion picture theaters are being opened in ever-increasing number in civilized and semi-civilized countries, that the motion picture industry has become the most popular form of diversion, which is offered for the leisure hours not only of the rich but of all classes of society. At the same time, there does not exist today a means of influencing the masses more potent than the cinema. The reason for this is to be sought for in the very nature of the pictures projected upon the screen, in the popularity of motion picture plays, and in the circumstances which accompany them. The power of the motion picture consists in this, that it speaks by means of vivid and concrete imagery, which the mind takes in with enjoyment and without fatigue, Even the crudest and most primitive minds, which have neither the capacity nor the desire to make the efforts necessary for abstraction or deductive reasoning, are captivated by the cinema. In place of the effort which reading or listening demands, there is a continued pleasure of a succession of concrete and, so to speak, living pictures. The power is still greater in the talking picture for the reason that interpretation becomes easier and the charm of music is added to the action of the drama. Dances and variety acts, which are sometimes introduced between the films, serve to increase the stimulation of the passions. Since then the cinema is in reality a sort of object lesson, which, for good or evil, teaches the majority of men more effectively than abstract reasoning, and must be elevated to conformity with the aims of a Christian conscience, and saved from depraving and demoralizing effects. Everyone knows what damage is done to the soul by bad motion pictures. They are occasions of sin. They seduce young people along the ways of evil by glorifying passions. They show life under a false light. They cloud ideals. They destroy pure love, respect for marriage, and affection for the family. They are capable also of creating prejudices among individuals and misunderstandings among nations, among social classes, among entire races. On the other hand, good motion pictures are capable of exercising a profoundly moral influence upon those who see them. In addition to affording recreation, they are able to arouse noble ideals of life, to communicate valuable conceptions, to impart a better knowledge of the history and the beauties of the fatherland and of other countries, to present truth and virtue under attractive forms, to create, or at least to favor, understanding among nations, social classes, and races, to champion the cause of justice, to give new life to the claims of virtue, and to contribute positively to the genesis of a just social order in the world. These considerations take on greater seriousness from the fact that the cinema speaks not to individuals but to multitudes, and that it does so in circumstances of time and place and surroundings which are most apt to arouse unusual enthusiasm for the good as well as for the bad, and to conduce to that collective exaltation which, as experience teaches us, may assume the most morbid forms. The motion picture is viewed by people who are seated in a dark theater and whose faculties, mental, physical, and often spiritual, are relaxed. One does not need to go far in search of these theaters. They are close to the home, to the church, and to the school, and they thus bring the cinema into the very center of popular life. Moreover, stories and actions are presented through the cinema by men and women whose natural gifts are increased by training and embellished by every known art, in a manner which may possibly become an additional source of corruption, especially to the young. Further, the motion picture has enlisted in its service luxurious appointments, pleasing music, the vigor of realism, every form of whim and fancy. For this very reason, it attracts and fascinates particularly the young, the adolescent, and even the child. Thus, at the very age when the moral sense is being formed, and when the notions and sentiments of justice and rectitude, of duty and obligation, and of ideals of life are being developed, the motion picture with its direct propaganda assumes a position of commanding influence. Due to the risk of scandalizing the young ones, bringing to mind our Lord's injunction of what happens to those who do so, it is therefore one of the supreme necessities of our times to watch and to labor, to the end that the motion picture be no longer a school of corruption, but that it be transformed into an effectual instrument for the education and the elevation of mankind. And here we record with pleasure that certain governments, in their anxiety for the influence exercised by the cinema in the moral and educational fields, have, with the aid of upright and honest persons, especially fathers and mothers of families, set up reviewing commissions and have constituted other agencies which have to do with motion picture production in an effort to direct the cinema for inspiration to the national works of great poets and writers. It was most fitting and desirable that you, venerable brethren, should have exercised a special watchfulness over the motion picture industry, which in your country is so highly developed and which has great influence in other quarters of the globe. It is equally the duty of the bishops of the entire Catholic world to unite in vigilance over this universal and potent form of entertainment and instruction, to the end that they may be able to place a ban on bad motion pictures because they are an offense to the moral and religious sentiments, because they are in opposition to the Christian spirit and to its ethical principles. There must be no weariness in combating whatever contributes to the lessening of the people's sense of decency and of honor. This is an obligation which binds not only the bishops, but also the faithful and all decent men who are solicitous for the decorum amid moral health of the family, of the nation, and of human society in general. In what then must this vigilance consist? The problem of the production of moral films would be solved radically if it were possible for us to have production wholly inspired by the principles of Christian morality. We can never sufficiently praise all those who have dedicated themselves, or who are to dedicate themselves to the noble cause of raising the standard of the motion picture, to meet the needs of education and the requirement of the Christian conscience. For this purpose, they must make full use of the technical ability of experts and not permit the waste of effort and of money by the employment of amateurs. But since we know how difficult it is to organize such an industry, especially because of considerations of a financial nature, and since, on the other hand, it is necessary to influence the production of all films, so that they may contain nothing harmful from a religious, moral, or social standpoint, pastors of souls must exercise their vigilance over films whenever they may be produced and offered to Christian peoples. As to the motion picture industry itself, we exhort the bishops of all countries, but in particular you, venerable brethren, to address and appeal to those Catholics who hold important positions in this industry. Let them take serious thought of their duties and of the responsibilities which they have as children of the Church to use their influence and authority for the promotion of principles of sound morality in films which they produce or aid in producing. There are surely many Catholics among the executives, directors, authors, and actors who take part in this business, and it is unfortunate that their influence has not always been in accordance with their faith and with their ideals. You will do well, venerable brethren, to pledge them to bring their profession into harmony with their conscience as respectable men and followers of Jesus Christ. In this, as in every other field of apostolate, pastors of souls will surely find their best fellow workers in those who fight in the ranks of Catholic action, and in this letter we cannot refrain from addressing to them a warm appeal that they give to this cause their full contribution and their unwearying and unfailing activity. From time to time the bishops will do well to recall to the motion picture industry that, amid the cares of their pastoral ministry, they are under obligation to interest themselves in every form of decent and healthy recreation, because they are responsible before God for the moral welfare of their people even during their time of leisure. Their sacred calling constrains them to proclaim clearly and openly that unhealthy and impure entertainment destroys the moral fiber of a nation. They will likewise remind the motion picture industry that the demands which they make regard not only the Catholics but all who patronize the cinema. In particular you, venerable brethren of the United States, will be able to insist that the justice that the industry of your country has recognized and accepted its responsibility before society. The bishops of the whole world will take care to make clear to the leaders of the motion picture industry that a force of such power and universality as the cinema can be directed, with great utility, to the highest ends of individual and social improvement. Why indeed should there be a question merely of avoiding what is evil? The motion picture should not be simply a means of diversion, a light relaxation to occupy an idle hour. With its magnificent power, it can and must be a bearer of light, and a positive guide to what is good. And now, in view of the gravity of the subject, we consider it timely to come down to certain practical indications. Above all pastors of souls must undertake to obtain each year from their people a pledge similar to the one already alluded to, which is given by their American brothers, and in which they promise to stay away from motion picture plays which are offensive to truth and to Christian morality. The most efficacious manner of obtaining these pledges or promises is through the parish church or school, and by enlisting the earnest cooperation of all fathers and mothers of families who are conscious of their grave responsibilities. The bishops will also be able to avail themselves of the Catholic press for the purpose of bringing home to the people the moral beauty and the effectiveness of this promise. The fulfillment of this pledge supposes that the people be told plainly which films are permitted to all, which are permitted with reservations, and which are harmful or positively bad. This requires the prompt, regular, and frequent publication of classified lists of motion picture plays, so as to make the information readily accessible to all. Special bulletins or other timely publications, such as the Daily Catholic Press, may be used for this purpose. Were it possible, it would in itself be desirable to establish a single list for the entire world, because all live under the same moral law. Since, however, there is here a question of pictures which interest all classes of society, the great and the humble, the learned and the unlettered, the judgment passed upon a film cannot be the same in each case and in all respects. Indeed, circumstances, usages, and forms vary from country to country, so that it does not seem practical to have a single list for all the world. If, however, films were classified in each country in a manner indicated above, the resultant list would offer in principle the guidance needed. The above-mentioned office will likewise look after the organization of existing motion picture theaters, belonging to parishes and to Catholic associations so that they may be guaranteed reviewed and approved films. Through the organization of these halls, which are often known to the cinema industry as good clients, it will be possible to advance a new claim, namely that the industry produce motion pictures which conform entirely to our standards. Such films may then readily be shown not only in the Catholic halls, but also in others. We realize that the establishment of such an office will involve a certain sacrifice, a certain expense for Catholics of the various countries, yet the great importance of the motion picture and the necessity of safeguarding the morality of Christian people and of the entire nation makes this sacrifice even more justified. Indeed, the effectiveness of our schools, of our Catholic associations, and even our churches is lessened and endangered by the plague of evil and pernicious motion pictures. Care must be taken that the office is composed of persons who are familiar with the technique of the motion picture and who are at the same time well grounded in the principles of Catholic morality and doctrine. They must in addition be under the guidance and the direct supervision of a priest chosen by the bishops. A mutual exchange of advice and information between the offices of the various countries will conduce to greater efficiency and harmony in the work of reviewing films, while due consideration will be given to varying conditions and circumstances. It will thus be possible to achieve unity of outlook in the judgments and in the communications which appear in the Catholic press of the world. These offices will profit not only from the experiments made in the United States, but also from the work which Catholics in other countries have achieved in the motion picture field. Even if employees of the office, with the best of goodwill and intentions, should make an occasional mistake, as happens in all human affairs, the bishops, in their pastoral prudence, will know how to apply effective remedies and to safeguard in every possible way the authority and prestige of the office itself. This may be done by strengthening the staff with more influential men or by replacing those who have shown themselves not entirely suited to such a delicate position. If the bishops of the world assume their share in the exercise of this painstaking vigilance over the motion picture, and of this we who know their pastoral zeal have no doubt, they will certainly accomplish a great work for the protection of the morality of their people in their hours of leisure and recreation. They will win the approbation and approval of all right-thinking men, Catholic and non-Catholic, and they will help to assure that a great international force, the motion picture, shall be directed towards the noble end of promoting the highest ideals and the truest standards of life. That these wishes and prayers which we put forth from a Father's heart may gain in virtue, we implore the help of the grace of God, and in the pledge thereof we impart to you, venerable brethren, and to the clergy and people entrusted to you, our loving apostolic benediction. Given at Rome, as St. Peter's, the 29th day of June, the feast of Saints Peter and Paul, in the year 1936, the 15th year of our pontificate, Pope Pius XI. That was Pope Pius XI, writing in the 1930s. And he was, the interwar pope, one of the popes that, when we talk about the great popes of the 20th century and the 19th century before the council, he often gets overlooked, as does his predecessor, Benedict XV. But Pius XI was one of those figures who added a lot to Catholic social teaching. Quadragesimo Anno is one of the great papal documents, one of the great ones of all time, and also so horribly misunderstood by people. He, in this document here, was trying to help the church really find its footing in America and use some of its growing influence to stem the tide of immorality. Because films, as he says in this document, have a great potential to be vehicles for morality, vehicles for harmless entertainment, in fact, for edifying entertainment. But that is not what happened before the council, although not long after this, the Legion of Decency would be formed, and for 30 years helped maintain order on things. And that went away with the closing of the council, and it's not a coincidence that that happened. I'm curious, though, what you think about this. Are you comfortable with the idea of Catholics flexing our influence, of some bishops just coming out flat out saying, no, you should not go see Saw at the theater, or putting a ban on a movie that actually says horrible things about the clergy and about the faith, that the bishops saying on matter of sin, on pain of sin, it is a sin for you to go see this movie, and then trying to keep as many Catholics as possible from seeing it, thereby ensuring that the film will do badly at the box office. Curious how you think about this. So let me know in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help, as is sharing this on social media. That helps a lot too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.